Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Today I would like to speak to you about God's love for man in our present day. Many of you who are not guests know that one of our beloved members, Calvin, is in the hospital right now struggling for his life. He has an immune system that is completely compromised, so he easily gets diseases if he's not very, very careful. He's got a strong constitution, but he easily gets diseases, and not the little ones. He gets big stuff, the kind that can kill you, and which this one may. It's quite possible that Calvin will not survive this, which is always strange considering that just last Sunday he was standing in the back in the corner over there, not feeling quite on top of his game, so to speak, but he was here. And on Monday he didn't come in. Calvin always comes in, stops by, has a little food, talks to us, and then goes about his duties in the neighborhood. He has little odd jobs that he does. Calvin is a very special person to me and to our church because he's the first person that has come through our Loaves and Fishes food program that became Orthodox. He and has come to church every Sunday since he became Orthodox and was capable of doing it when he was healthy. He was, the way that happened was that he was very sick once, and he had been he worked in the food program for about 7 years, and then he had to stop doing that. He got sick and was in the hospital dying. He had been exposed to the faith, to our faith, for many years, and was and always seemed very interested in it, and was on his deathbed. And so I had the idea came to me to chrismate him, to bring him into the church. He was already a Christian. And I went to the hospital. He was unconscious, but still I felt that the Lord was directing me to bring him into the church, and so I did. And he immediately recovered. And he kind of brings meaning to the time that the Lord himself had a man that was blind. You can remember this particular man was blind. The Lord touched him and healed him, and he says, "What do you see now?" And the man said, "I see men as trees walking." In other words, his healing wasn't complete. He didn't see things clearly. He actually saw with fuzziness. And the Lord touched him again, and then he said, "What do you see?" And he said, "I see clearly now." So he did it twice. Well, this is kind of what happened with Calvin, because even though he had recovered from a deathly illness in which he had meningitis and had completely lost his hearing and was at death's door, when he came back, he still wasn't healed. He was better, but not healed. And so in not too long of an amount of time, he got sick again. And was again the same way at death's door, only this time he was crazy as well. Somehow the disease had affected his mind, and he was ranting and raving and really completely out of it. But as with that blind man, everybody prayed. He's very well loved, and he was like Dorcas, the woman that made coats the women went to Peter and said, "Can't you heal this woman who has just died, because she does so many wonderful things for us, and we love her and we miss her so much," is basically what they said. And that's kind of the way we felt. Calvin had become a part of our family. He came off the streets. He was but he has a particular temperament that is completely and utterly humble and cheerful at the same time, no matter what the situation he has in his life, other than when he was in this particular thing pretty out of his mind. But he very easily wins the hearts of people, and is really, really the epitome of what a humble Christian man ought to be. And he inspires in others the desire to want to pray for him and to go to the Lord for him, like the gospel passage today, Jairus' daughter. Of course he's going for his daughter, but he was a ruler of the synagogue, which I find quite appropriate, being not a ruler of the synagogue, but a pastor, and going to the Lord for Calvin. Well, the second time, Calvin again recovered and came back to us. And Calvin had been, from the time that he was born, a crack addict. And in all of those illnesses, he had not recovered from that addiction. He was a crack addict, a pretty bad one. Somehow he managed not to let it overcome his personality, which is why I was talking about what a kindly and wonderful person he was, but still, it affected his life. And as someone had said to me with great sympathy, we have to have much greater sympathy for this man, because this man didn't choose this particular affliction. He was born with it. You've heard of crack babies where that happens, and that was Calvin's case. Well, the second time when he recovered from his illness, which was another complete miracle, because both times he was at death's door. And it was absolutely sure that he was going to die, and yet he didn't the second time. But when he came back the second time, he was healed of his crack addiction. Healed of it. It was completely gone. He had no desire for it. And he began to put on weight. Calvin's always been thin, strong but thin. And so he put on weight and he got stronger. And actually became a little portly even. It was kind of nice to see. And has lived in this resurrected condition for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, whereby he became a zealous person who loved to come to church, came every Sunday, took communion not every Sunday, but quite a bit, and really had become a member of our church. That's why I say he was very special, because not only did he come through the program and come into the church, but the Lord took away from him a serious addiction, in which I must tell you, as a person that works with crack addicts every day, it's not something that people give up that easily. It's a very difficult thing to give up. The addiction to that particular drug is very deep, and if you've had it your whole life, you can see what kind of a miracle it is, that just like that, it was gone. And it shows you. It was one of the things I want to point out about what it shows you about God's intervention in our lives and what He can do with someone who loves Him and whom He loves particularly. And so Calvin went on for about a year and a half, and we saw him all this Sunday. On Monday he had not come here, and I always notice when Calvin doesn't come, because he comes every single day to the food program and sits with us and chats and is his usual kind of loving, friendly self. But he wasn't here, so I thought about it, but not too much. I should have been at the conference, the OCA conference that we had in Seattle. Gabe went, and I should have been there too, but for the last year I've had a cough, and it was thought that the moisture in Seattle might have made it a little bit worse, and therefore it was recommended by myself that I stay at home. So I did. I took my advice. I was thinking about this particular stay-at-home thing with the life of St. Mary of Egypt and Abba Zosimus. If you'll remember, Abba Zosimus, after he had met St. Mary of Egypt, who is one of the greatest saints of our church, she had been in the wilderness and in the desert, hadn't seen a man for 47 years, or any human being, or anything that walked even. And the Lord directed Abba Zosimus to her, and when he was ready to go back to his monastery and she was ready to go back into the wilderness, she said he wanted to stay with her and follow her forever, but she said, no, that's not for you to do, but you will see me one more time. And she said, go back to your monastery, and when Lent comes, which is how she he met her in the first place. They have a practice where in Lent, the monks of the monastery, except for just a few, would leave the monastery, go into the desert for the whole of the Lenten season, and survive there, praying by themselves alone without anyone for that period of time. And then he did that and went and he found her and met her. And she says to him, she says, Abba Zosimus was amazed to hear that she knew the rules of the monastery and could only say, "Glory to God who bestows great gifts on those who love Him." And she continued, "Remain, abbot, in the monastery, and even if you wish to depart, you will not be able to do so." It's this little passage. You know, this passage has always stayed with me. We read this life, which is an extensive life every year in the Lenten season. And I practically have it memorized from the years that we've heard it. And every little detail in it has some meaning for me and perhaps for you too. But this particular passage about her telling him, you'll want to go into the wilderness probably. And even though I've said that you need to stay in your monastery, you'll probably want to go into the wilderness anyway, but you won't be able to do it. She said that a year before. Well, it turns out that he was very ill. And he wasn't able to go. And then on the day before, on Good Friday of that year, he put some communion into a chalice because she said she hadn't received communion in 47 years and that she wanted to receive it. Actually, she was preparing for her own death. And he went to the edge of the bank. No one was there because all the other monks had left the monastery except for him and maybe one other person. And so he went there by himself, no one around, and St. Mary of Egypt was on the other bank and walked across, walking on the water, great saint that she was. And he served her communion. After that she went and died and reposed. But it always has stuck with me that she knew somehow that he was not going to be able, even though his greater impulses would be to go out and try to find her again, he wouldn't have been able to do it because she knew he was going to be sick. And that's what occurred to me. The reason I bring that up is that what occurred to me because on Tuesday of this last week, Father Ford, who's a retired Episcopal priest who lives at the corner, very wonderful man, very active in the freedom for black men and women in the 60s, did a lot of work with Martin Luther King and all of that, and is truly a great man. And Calvinists worked for him. There's a beautiful place at the corner. And he came down to me very distressed. It's only been 2 days since we've seen Calvin, but he came down to me very distressed and said, you know, I haven't seen Calvin in a couple of days. I'm very worried about him. Would you find out about him for me? Well, that would have meant that I'd have to go to I know where Calvin lives, so I would have meant that I had to, which I wasn't even thinking of doing even though I was here. You know, it's only been a couple of days. He hasn't shown up for a couple of days sometimes. But because of Father Ford's real worry about him, and he's an old man, I wanted to give him some comfort. So I took one of our workers and we went down to the apartment where Calvin lives, and I sat outside while I sent my worker to the door to see how he was. And he was on the couch, very, very ill, the worker told me. I didn't think so much of it that day. We got back in the car and drove back. But it kept staying with me that maybe he was sicker than I had perhaps thought. And so the next day we got a whole bunch of food together, soups and things like that, and went back to his apartment. And this time I went in, and he was laying on the couch, absolutely, almost delirious. And he'd been laying there for 2 days in total suffering and pain. If I had been at the conference, he would not have gotten help probably and would be dead even now, because he was so suffering. His brothers, for whatever reasons, didn't think a thing about calling the 911 and getting to the hospital or anything. They just kind of left him there. Sometimes Calvin, in fairness to them, sometimes Calvin has said that he doesn't want to go to the hospital when he was in much better state than the one he was in. He said that, so that's maybe stayed with them, and they just thought, well, we'll just leave him here and maybe he'll recover. He would not have recovered, and he may not now. it's quite possible that he wouldn't recover. But if you think about it, if we hadn't have called 911, he would still be suffering on that bed and such absolute and terrible pain that he was in. He was in terrible pain. And yet, when we saw him in the hospital over the last couple of days, even though his organs are failing and it's quite possible that he's going to die, he is not in the kind of pain that he was in. And even if he passes, he won't pass in such terrible pain and suffering, but perhaps he will not, on the other hand. But when I was thinking about this, and was thinking, my goodness, here did God reach into my life? This is what I'm thinking. And make me sick, not terribly, but just sick, so that when it came time to save one human being, I would be available to do it, and to be able to go to that person and help them. Even if it did not save them, at least it would alleviate their suffering. Did God have that much of a plan in His mind that He kept me from, even though I might have wanted to go to Seattle, I was unable to do it for the sake of this one man, who is a person that came through our food program and was a crack addict his whole life until only recently. Consider that. Now just consider that for a second, because that's what I've been doing. What kind of love does God have for us? And what kind of care? That's one person. And in many people's cases, one person that we might be dismissive about and say, well, you know, he didn't serve his whole life, he's not this or that. Maybe God would just forget him. But He didn't. In fact, He didn't just not forget him, He remembered him a year before he whatever the word is, got the illness that he has now. This is also very interesting. When I went into the room with my wife and we were praying with Calvin, Calvin was watching the television, even though he couldn't watch the television because he's completely out of it. But they must have turned something on for him to give him a little comfort. And the TV does not have the sound coming from the television. It comes from a speaker that's in your hand. You know, you hear it through this little thing, and it's also how you contact the nurse if you need her. And so it was very loud. Yeah. And they were talking. I wasn't paying a bit of attention to that, until at the top of his lungs, someone on the television, it was a baseball movie, said, "It's just his time to go." Just like that. I'm praying. I'm not thinking about a thing, hoping that Calvin will then be that. And the man said, "It's just his time to go." You know what he was talking about? About running the bases. It was a baseball movie. And he was saying, it's time for the man to, you know, try to steal second or wherever. But to me, who was standing there in that moment, it blasted that to my ears. It's just his time to go. Well, maybe it is, and maybe it isn't. Maybe I'm just reading something into that, and maybe I'm not. But nonetheless, I tell you this, the most amazing thing is that God has such care for us and watches us so closely and keeps us so in tune with life that He has that individual care for each of us, not just Calvin. If you wonder if you're being cared for, you know, in those difficult moments when you remember your pasts and you have all that suffering that you have in your life, perhaps, maybe not, but or you see others that have that kind of thing and you wonder, where is God in all of this? And you ask that kind of profound question that does not necessarily even have an answer. Remember Calvin. And remember that God has each of us in His life the way that He has my brother and my spiritual son and my friend. He has each of us in His life that way and loves us that much. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.